And it's something important to know. It's a combination of two things. It's a combination of Mishnah and a Gamora. We're going to read it inside, and then I'm going to go quote the Gamora and the Mishnah, and you're going to see what, in fact, they mean. Shachris, we say Birchas HaTorah, and after the Birchas HaTorah, we say a certain thing. Among the things we say there, if you look on page 15 in the Birnbaum, second paragraph, it says the Mishnah and Peah, and also the Gamora and Talmud Yerushalmi, Babli, Talmud Shabbos Kuf Kuf. Read it, Joe.
These are the things which there's no set amount. Peah, v'habibah, v'elohein, v'kibud, v'chatnasas, v'chim, v'kurchalim, v'chatnasas, chala, v'chalvayas, hamesh, ion, tefillah,
These are the things that don't have a fixed measure. Peah. Peah are the corners of the field. The Jewish farmer was required to leave certain of his crop for the poor people that unfortunately did not have. We have, among other things, is Peah. Peah is the corner of the field. Now, if you look at this table, this is a corner, and this is a corner. We don't know how much you consider a corner. It'd be a little corner or a bigger corner. So there's a flexibility as about how much you would consider a corner. And then habikurim, the first fruits. They used to bring the first fruits on the Yom Tov of Shavuos. The Beis Hamikdash again. The farmer would see the first fruits. He would tie some kind of a sign to indicate the first fruits as you bring to the Beis Hamikdash. Again, how much is the first fruits? Is it one fruit? Is it a fruit? Is it a bushel of fruit? Or is it several bushels of fruit? It's very flexible as the amount. And then Hara'oyim, they used to make Sholosh Regolim. They used to go 3 pilgrimages every year to Yerushalayim to celebrate the Yom Tov of Pesach, the Yom Tov Shavuos, and the Yom Tov of Sukkot. How much did they offer, bring at that time? It's also flexible, depending on the individual thing. And the acts of kindness. A person can do what the Boy Scouts have, do one good deed a day, or as the Torah says, you do as many good deeds as you can a day. Again, there's no fixed measure. And a person can learn Torah for 5 minutes a day and say he learned Torah that day, or he can learn for 5 hours, or 10 hours, or even more. And there again, everybody learned Torah, but there's certainly a difference in how much you learn. And then it says, these are the things that the person eats the fruits of them in this world. And the principal part of it exists for him in the world to come. In other words, this is a very fortunate list of commandments that God gives 2 rewards for the same action. He gives a payment now and a bonus later on. And the bonus is even bigger than the payment now. Now that's a wonderful arrangement. So it's good to know which ones are these. Not to imply that the other mitzvahs you don't get big reward for it. Or even to imply that because you get a 2-fold reward necessarily, that it's 2-fold is more than the 1 reward that you get for some other mitzvah. But these are the types that have 2-fold rewards to them. They are considered very important in the eyes of God, and therefore we have to consider it so. These are they. Keep it all the aim, honoring your father and mother. God considers it so important to honor your parents, because the Gamora tells us the parents are with God partners in your creation. So God said, if you honor my partner, consider as though you honor me. The Gamora. The Gemilas Chasodim, acts of kindness. There again, this is one of the foundations and the reason for creation of the world is that people should be kind one to another. And then here's another mitzvah. Hashkomas Beis Hamikdash Shachris of Arvis. Just by the fact that you came here on time to learn Torah, coming early in the house of learning to learn Torah in the morning and in the evening, That is a mitzvah by itself, even if you didn't learn any Torah at all. It's a twofold mitzvah that you get twofold reward. It's good to know. So just practice is considered a tremendous thing.
You know, if a person is a disrespect, suppose a person is afraid of anything, but he just wants to come for the reward of coming. Can he just come and sit in the back and not do anything?
It's like you get all dressed up to go to a wedding and then go to the wedding.
He helps the minion. Could you do that and not
You
be harmed?
would, yes. And you would get reward for coming early. But still, it's better to combine it with also learning, of course. You're there, you might as well do the job. And being hospitable to wayfarers, hospitality is a very great mitzvah, especially if a person's in a strange community. If you feed and shelter him, it's considered a very great mitzvah. And our forefather Abraham, the example of how he used to go and make it possible for anybody that passed by him to have this food and shelter. And he even had a special that is at all sides of the compass. So a person didn't have to walk around to come to it there. And when a person was given food and everything, and he gave him the very best food, he would want to thank his host. The host says, don't thank me, thank the one that created the world. This is his. And thereby he got people to accept on themselves the responsibility to pray to God and to thank God, which is a tremendous mitzvah. And visiting sick people, wishing them well, it's a tremendous mitzvah. Incidentally, a lot of these mitzvahs are Gemilas Chesed, Gemilas Chasodim. And we could ask very simply, why do you have to enumerate them? We already mentioned Gemilas Chasodim, acts of kindness, and Bikur Cholim would be acts of kindness. So why do you mention them? But we'll discuss.
But do these particularly get an extra reward for these particular ones?
You get this one's yes. Achnosos Kala, if you help a poor Jewish girl get married, it's a tremendous mitzvah. And the Boasam is, if you go and go to a Jewish funeral and see that the a Jewish person passed away is properly buried according to the halacha, that means in the ground and not cremated or anything or embalmed or anything. These are tremendous mitzvahs. The Iyun Tefillah would be here translated as devotion and prayer. We'll discuss the Gamora. I'll get to the Gamora and discuss what each one of these things mean. And bringing peace between one person and another person, that's considered tremendous in the eyes of God. And of course, bringing peace is not an easy task. As a matter of fact, it's considered a very worthwhile task, and a person that is considered a very great person in the eyes of God. Aaron HaKohen, he was a Rodem Sholem. He was a person who ran after peace. He always tried to make peace between one person, and he was famous for that. But all these mitzvahs put together, the Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. The study of Torah is equal to them all put together. Just to indicate to you how tremendous the God holds the study of Torah, that the reward is immense, and it's a twofold reward. So we shouldn't take it as something that's a little itsy-bitsy thing that you don't really have to get excited about. It's of the top caliber. All right, now that we learned this, I'm going to go now in the Gamora. We'll go first to the Gamora Shabbos, like this. The Gamora on Kuf Zayin says like this, on page 127 on the first side, it says like this. Omar Rabbi, Omar Asi, Shisha Devortim. There are 6 things, the fruits of them in this world. Karen Kamas Mabal, and the principal part of them exists for him in the world to come. Ve'elohim, these are the enumeration of the 6, according to Rabbi Yochanan. Being hospital to wayfarers, that's 1. The Bikur Cholim, and being visiting the sick. The Iyun Tefillah, and concentration upon prayer. And Hashkoma Space HaMidrash, coming early to the house of learning. Hamagado Torah, a person that raises his children to learn Torah. In other words, a Jew has a responsibility not only to seek to learn Torah himself, but he must raise his children to learn Torah. not even that, even further. If a person like myself, who has not only got to the point where I'm learning Torah, but thanks God I already got smicha, I'm a rabbi, I have the responsibility, the added responsibility of teaching other Jews Torah. This is my responsibility to God. I don't have to get any special thanks for it. It's just that at this point in my Torah learning, I have this additional responsibility. I would be derelict in my responsibility to God and to Jewish people if in fact I didn't teach Torah. In other words, I am in your debt for allowing me to teach you Torah. So don't assume it's only a one-way street. In fact, you are in fact doing me a favor. And the convening of a teacher is called like his children too. So therefore, I can fulfill this mitzvah. I'm Abdil Bono with Talmud Torah. Not only can I fill it with my own children, but I can only fill it also with other Jews as well. Bringing Torah. Then we have if you judge your fellow Jew favorably. Now what does that mean, judge your fellow favorably? It means you don't know what the person did. You don't know whether to interpret that what he did is a proper action or an improper action. Give him the benefit of the doubt. When you do something, you always intend it for good, even if it doesn't turn out so good. And so give your fellow Jew the same like you do for yourself. Just like you for yourself, you give yourself the benefit of the doubt. I meant if it didn't turn out. So also my fellow Jew say he meant well. And don't say, he was terrible, or he did something terrible. Because in the first place, we have a general rule. You're not supposed to judge your fellow man till you come into his position. And who knows what prompted the person to do a certain thing. And then besides everything else, a person that judges a righteous type unfavorably is punished by God. So what do you have to get into the judging business? Don't judge unfavorably, and it'll be fine. So the Gamora asked the question, how do you say these are the 6 things that you have a twofold? Tanan, I learned in the Mishnah in Peah. See, this is a combination. The Gamora combines them both together. The Siddur. Avos Gamorim, these are the things. Also, some that a person does them. That eats the fruits of them in this world. And the principal part of it is the World Cup. And what is in the Mishnah? Elohim. Keep it over aim, honoring your father and mother. That's not one of the 6 that's mentioned out of the yoke. And Gemilas Chasodim, acts of kindness. Specifically say acts of kindness, but he mentioned examples of acts of kindness. So there's something there. Avos, there again, that's not one of the 6 mentioned by Rabbi Yochanan. And then he says Talmud Torah, and the learning of Torah is equal to them all put together. And that also is not one of the, and that also is not mentioned specifically by Rabbi Yochanan. So it appears to be some kind of a contradiction. You've got 2 lists of twofold reward mitzvahs, and some of them parallel, and some of them seem to get a little extra. So the Gamora says, the Gamora asks the question, Hani, these ones that are mentioned in the Mishnah, presumably that means only these. No, but there's something else. No. So how can you give a new list? It's a legitimate question, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So on Kuf Zayin Omid Beis, the Gemara continues saying, the Haknosis Orchiv that Rabbi Yochanan brought, and Bikur Cholim that Rabbi Yochanan brought, that's examples of Gemilas Chasodim. And the Rashi says, the Iyo Tilo, what does it mean, concentration in prayer? I know because Gemilas Chasodim, in truth, this is also considered acts of kindness. Why is an act of kindness to concentrate on your prayers? Because he says, the Rashi, see it's written in the 11th chapter of Mishnah, of Proverbs, Homo nafsho ish chesed. A person redeems his soul, a man that does a kindness. And presumably, we have here on the side, chesed v'nefesh, kindness and soul. Hainu tefillah. It's talking about tefillah. There again, like when a person says, I pour out my soul before the Lord. In other words, when you concentrate in your prayer, you're pouring out your innermost feelings to God. And when you pour out your innermost feelings to God, that is the most, that's intended to provoke God's kindness, chesed. You understand? So in effect, it's a type of gemilas chesed, of kindness. You're making it possible that your prayer should be acceptable by God by praying to Him in a proper fashion. If a person prays and doesn't really concentrate on his prayer, it just says the word by rote and doesn't really concentrate on its meaning or with any feeling, the prayers are destined not necessarily to be heard because they're not acceptable to God unless they're prayed with the proper intent. And we have a general rule that if a person gets water, we have a general rule. It is better push. We have a general rule. It's better to do a little with proper intent than a lot without proper intent. And then Rashi continues to say, Hashkava is basically when you come up early to the house of learning, it's also a mitzvah by itself. And Kidu Bonim, the Talmud Torah, or you raise your children to learn Torah, that's also Talmud. Rashi says that's also Talmud Torah. And not only learning yourself, but encouraging others to learn Torah is also Talmud Torah. And what's the best way to learn Torah is to come to learn. If you never show up at the place where they're learning, how can you possibly learn? It can't happen unless you expose yourself to learning. That's right. And the Rashi continues to say, when you judge your fellow Jew favorably, this is also under the classification of bringing peace between you and your favorite person. For instance, if a person says, sees a person do an action, he says, really, he didn't sin against me. This was an accident. And he intended to do good. You understand? So once you enjoy, when you have that kind of a concept, no matter what he did, you'll say, well, I don't take offense at it. You understand? And that brings peace between you and your fellow Jew. You're not angry at a person because they did something that maybe they shouldn't have done. You understand? Sometimes, for instance, we say something to a person, and we really didn't mean to hurt their feelings, and we turn out we hurt their feelings. And so the person that receives the thing, he'll say, he really didn't mean to say something to hurt my feelings. It came out that way, but he really didn't mean it. You understand? That way you're still not angry with each other. I understand that. Don't worry about the tussle. Don't worry about it. Don't give me the Gamora until I ask you. But I'm just telling you.
Okay.
All right, fine. So he said like this. So under the generalization of these three of our Mishnah, we can find these six. But there's also honoring your father and mother. That's not mentioned Rabbi Yochanan. And we will say that Rabbi Yochanan doesn't disagree with that. In other words, he doesn't mention it because it's self-evident, if you will. So that's what the Gamora comes out to the conclusion, goes into the other. And that's presumably the way we daven. We combine them two together. You see it there? We combine the two Maimorim together in the tefillah right after. We combine these two together, these six with the three. So you have in effect more than three that you read. Okay? All right, now give me the Gamora Brochos, Joe. The middle, the bottom one. Thank you. The Gamora Brochos brings the thesis on Lamed Beis, Amud Beis. We have a thing that says if a person, sometimes a person is pushing it. He needs something very bad from God. So what does he do? He insists that God is God to listen to. So he pours his heart out to God. You've got to give me what I need. You understand? There's a joke told about it. I told you this joke. There was a story told about in the old time. There were two people that stayed after shul, after the davening, to pray to God for special prayer. There was a wealthy man and a poor man. So the poor man he needed 5 ruble. and the wealthy man needed 50,000 rubles. So they're praying on either side of the shul and trying to out-pray each other so that God should listen to them. And each one is shouting harder and harder, God send me the 5 ruble, God send me the 50,000 rubles. Until finally the rich man got just exasperated with the poor man. And he put in his pocket, took out 5 with small things like this. So seriously, when we come to God and we're insisting that God must do what we want to do when we want it, this is a form of arrogance. Who makes it so sure that we are so worthy that we're entitled to be listened to just because we think we want it? In many cases, what we think we want may be the worst thing in the world if God gave it to us. I remember many years ago, I understood. It took me some years of learning, I'll admit. When I was a younger man, I was foolish in that direction, and I admit it. And I would want to insist that certain things should be. But as I get a little older, and I got a lot older now, Baruch Hashem, I realized many years ago that I don't necessarily know what is good for me. And I don't necessarily know when it should be given to me, what is good for me. So when I pray to God, I always pray to God with a reservation. I ask God to do what He thinks is good for me. I don't tell Him to do what I think is good for me, because I may not know what's good for me. You understand? There's a big difference. God doesn't make mistakes. I make plenty of them. You understand? So it's a little presumptuous to just push it. Now, we just said concentration on prayer is a wonderful thing, and all of a sudden you say anybody that persistent prayer, this is something that's not so good. So the Balei Tesis has addressed this question. He says, if a person thinks that because he's praying, asking God for certain things, so therefore he puts his concentration on his prayers. He asks a wonderment. Here it appears that if you concentrate on your prayers, it's not a nice thing. And also in another place, we learn there are 3 things that recall to heavenly court a person's sin. In other words, if a person asks for an immediate heavenly intervention, at that point, checking of his books, because the heaven will say, who is this person that wants this extraordinary service? Is he worthy of receiving this? Perhaps he's not, and perhaps he should be punished for his arrogance. So what 3 things? Since one of the 3 things is mentioned, concentration and prayer, there's an arrogance involved there. If a person thinks that they must have what they need when they think they need it. And then we learned in another place, the Gamora, quoting the Gamora we just came from, a person eats the fruits of them in this world, and there he mentioned among the things, devotion and prayer. And there it appears to be a good thing, that you get a 2-fold reward for it. So how do you make a difference between these 2 things? And also, there are 3 things that a person is never saved from every day. Remember yesterday we learned, and the day before, about Lashon Hara, how terrible it is to say Lashon Hara, how horrible the Avera of Lashon Hara is. It says there, one of the 3 things that a person never escapes is concentration and prayer. What does that mean? Cannot always concentrate on his prayers. I don't know what your experience has been, but my experience is a lot of times other thoughts come into your mind when you're praying. You come with the best intentions. You want to pray to God, you want to concentrate in the prayer, and there have been Rahmanas. You have a lot of sorrows, you got a lot of problems, and even if you didn't want it, it comes into your mind. So there's a lot of lacking in the concentration that you're doing when you're praying. So it appears to feel like this. So the thesis answers this. There are 2 types of concentration of prayer. One is good and one is bad. What is it? Here, if a person assumes that when they concentrate in their prayer that necessarily God will necessarily fulfill their request, that is bad. Because you're never going to make the assumption that you're so wonderful that God's got to give you exactly what you want when you want it. But in the other place, in the Gamora and Shabbos, where you say concentration of prayer is good, it's talking about where you intend, you create on what you're saying and trying to present it with a proper. There's a thesis in Shabbos, Iyun b'tefillah, concentration on prayer, and it says there when you intend, when you concentrate with your whole intellect, your heart. The heart means your intellect. And it also says there, it mentions the fact that if a person, you concentrate in your prayer, it's considered a good thing. But there in brachas, where a person concentrates in his prayer, is also considered, it comes to a pain in the heart, that's not considered a good thing. Because over there, he wants to know when God will do his request. He thinks, that, presumably, that his prayers are acceptable to God. Maybe not. Don't be so presumptuous. Otherwise they should be. But don't assume that they are there. And it says there are three things that mention, now here they mention it again, the three things that mention a person's sins. Now what are the three things? Kir notui, a wall that's leaning. A wall that's leaning is that it could fall any moment. It is stupidity of the highest degree to walk under such a wall. It can fall on you. Who makes it that you should be protected by God against foolishness like that? And also, iyun tefillah, the concentration of prayer. To presume that your prayers are necessarily, must be acceptable by God. And the third thing, moser din l'shamayim al chaveru. A person has some kind of complaint against somebody else. Like for instance, Sarah, our foremother, had a complaint against Abraham, our forefather. How come you prayed to God that you didn't have any children? Why don't you say we didn't have any children? Because of that, God made her die before Abraham, one of the reasons. You're not supposed to make the assumption that necessarily you are better than somebody else. Even though in truth, Sarah, my forefather, may have been better than Abraham. But that's got nothing to do with your own way in which you approach God. There are three things that a person cannot be saved at every moment, every day. One thing is Lashon Hara. We talked about yesterday and the day before about how terrible Lashon Hara is. The truth is, every one of us are guilty of Lashon Hara. We sometimes say negative things, although we shouldn't. Here we learned it, we know it's terrible and it's horrible, and it comes out the mouth. You're being honest. You don't have to have somebody else say it, you're saying it yourself. Since that it's so difficult, you have to concentrate on utilizing your energy to say Lashon, a good language. What's that? Meaning Torah, doing mitzvah, this is good. And a lot of times people think of doing sins even though they may not do them. Again, this creeps into the mind, a mishagas, a craziness. And nobody's immune from that, even if you wouldn't do it. And you don't want to do it. You don't even want to. Creeps in your mind to do something terrible. God protects the person that if he concentrates upon good things, eventually these bad thoughts diminish and hopefully eventually, but it's always possible. The iyun tefillah and also this iyun tefillah, and it wasn't mean concentration, you're not saved from mission on prayer. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that you necessarily expect that your prayers will be answered right away, but it means like this, the person doesn't concentrate on his prayers as much as he should. And we're all guilty of that, unfortunately, even though we may from time to time intend to do it. It keeps in our mind things that we're not necessarily doing, and it's hard to, it's impossible to guard. But since we know these things occur, we have to be as much as we can on guard against them. All right, and then I'll take. All right, please forgive me. All right, one more Gamora. Just one thing. I just want to get where the other Gamora is, and then we can put these two away. Maybe get a little toweling or something. That's the Gamora and Bubba. Here again, the Tesis is also talking about concentration of prayer, And it's terrible, he says, when you think other thoughts when you're praying, or think that necessarily your prayers must be answered right away. It's also a pain in the heart. And then fine, let me see. What's bad is when you don't concentrate on your prayers, that is not a proper thing. All right, this point. Well, this point. And we'll have another share together Thursday, when we'll learn about the Parsha Shmuel. Torah coming Avos and Kedoshim. I hope we answer. I think this is a hole in here. That's the okay, fine. All right, could you put these three in the Rabbi's room?